On this week, we talk about some tips that you might want to know on how to keep your fiber clean and why it's important. Welcome to the show where we tackle the tough questions that are submitted by ICT installers, designers, estimators, project managers, and even customers. We are connecting at the human level so that we can connect the world. If you're watching this on YouTube, would you mind hitting the subscribe button and the bell button to be notified when new content is being created? If you're listening to us on one of the podcast platforms, would you mind leaving us a 5-star rating? Those couple little steps helps us take on the algorithm, which helps get this message out to more people so we can educate, encourage, and enrich the lives of more people. Thursday nights, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. What are you doing? Why don't you join us on one of our live streams? We broadcast live for about 30 minutes and we answer your questions on installation, certification, design, even career path. We answer them all. And they are recorded, so if you can't miss them, you can actually go back and watch them. Lastly, while this show is free, and it will always remain free, if you would like to support this show, you can support it by becoming a Patreon member and getting access to additional information. You can go to our website and browse through our Amazon links and buy something there. You won't pay any extra for the product, but we do make a small stipend on that. And of course, we're always open to sponsors. Now, as I said, one of the first things I always learn in fiber training classes is the number one problem with fiber is contamination. Contamination. So what are some tips that we can do to make your life a little bit easier? I thought about this. So I reached out to two very close friends of mine and two subject matter experts, one from Senko, one from Polywater. Hello, gentlemen. Would you mind just taking it for those who may not have know you guys because they may not have been around long, because I am growing daily. Just introduce yourself. We'll start with you, Brian. Who are you and why should people listen to you?
So I'm Brian Teague, product line manager at Senko Advanced Components, and I've been in the industry for over 20 years. And sort of my area of specialty is connector maintenance, and so I've been on a number of standards groups as well as do a lot of trainings literally around the world for different organizations, including Bixie, talking about addressing some of the problems that people run into with fiber and face maintenance.
And Jake. Who are you?
I'm Jake Jonnes. I'm Vice President of the Communications Division at American Polywater Corporation. We're a specialty chemical manufacturer. We manufacture chemicals for pulling, lubricants, cleaners, sealants, and adhesives. Anything chemical for the utility industry. We've been doing this for 49 years. And so if it has anything to do with chemicals and the installation or preparation of cables, Polywater's usually got a name on it.
Very cool. So I got some subject matter experts in the house. So every Bixie class I've ever sat, and I said this in the intro, they always harp on you. Contamination, contamination, contamination. Contamination, number one enemy. Why is it such a problem? And what can we do to fix this? Brian, I'll let you lead off since you are the component guy.
Okay, yeah. So with contamination, you really have to sort of break it down to two parts. One of it is dust contamination, the other one's residue. With residue contamination, the potential problems you're going to run into would be changes in the reflectance values as the light is traveling across the between the two connectors. And with dust, that's the one that is the biggest problem. If you get a dust particle that is somewhere in the path of the light, like in the fiber or even into the core area, it'll cause an increase in insertion loss. And when that starts to happen, that can start to put your fiber link out of the power budget that was planned. And so you could either have not only like a total loss, but also you could run into problems too, where you have like high spikes, which are messing up the basically the end power level that you're going to get on the other side.
Now, your role, you're forward facing to customer, right, Brian? I believe so. I think if I remember right. Yeah.
That's correct. So I spend time working with people, actually working with cable assemblies, and then also working with new connector systems.
So would you say contamination, in your view, from what you see, would you say contamination is the number one issue?
Yeah, absolutely, Chuck. I would, and also not just with cable assemblies, but even we're seeing a lot of problems with people having issues with their optical transceivers, where they're plugging dirty connectors in and ending up either shortening the life of the transceivers or in some cases ruining the transceivers. So it's not just a cable assembly thing with cleanliness; it's also even at the transceiver level.
Gotcha. So Jake, I know you're not a component guy, but you're a Polywater. You got to get clear. So I'm sure you guys get asked questions all the time. I've got dirty fiber. How do I clean it? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, a lot of that comes down to using the right products, and using the right products is more than just the chemical. It's the entire package. There are several different types of chemical cleaners, but it also comes down to how that is packaged, what type of wipes you're using. Are the cleaners just like the components? The cleaners can be contaminated as well if they're not stored correctly, if the container is not sealed correctly, and then it gets into one step further is the application. So you can screw it up. There's a lot of pitfalls on the journey of cleaning some fiber components, because it's the how you store your chemicals, using the right chemicals, using the right materials, and then the application process or the method.
So let me ask you this: Are all cleaners can't talk today? Are all cleaners equal?
No, not even close. So there's really three major types of cleaners that get used, and one that everyone knows is the alcohol. The other one is there's a fast drying, non-flammable type of cleaner, which is kind of the preferred method, the preferred cleaner. But I'm not going to try to completely change the industry from using alcohol, because the truth is alcohol can be used if used correctly and you use the correct alcohol. And the third is a little more unique solution that is out there. It's maybe contradictory to what everyone believes, but there are water-based cleaners out there. But again, everyone says water's bad, and it's got some drawbacks. I mean, water freezes, so you can't, if you're from Minnesota, your product can freeze if you keep it in the truck. But using a purified product with additives on it, and you use a wet to dry method, that works as well. So there's three major types, but I think, it probably is worth stepping in a little deeper and talking about each type of cleaner and what to do to prevent them from being contaminated and where their strengths are.
From your point of view, which do you think gets sold more, the alcohol, the water, or the third system that you mentioned?
It's the alcohol. And Brian, I know you're going to nod because you and I've had that conversation. Brian, what would you say the percentage of fiber cleaned by alcohol is?
If I had to say today, I would say probably at least 90%.
Yeah,
Alcohol is still very prevalent that's out there.
Yep.
Usually these specialty chemicals are used for like higher end applications, but it's changing as people are better understanding and appreciating the value of these these cleaning solvents that are designed specifically for optics.
Here's our first pro tip of the day. If you're using alcohol cleaner, use an approved alcohol cleaner. Don't go to Walgreens or CVS and buy that 88% stuff, because it's got moisture and chemicals and I think even some kind, a little bit of detergent in that as well. And here's the second pro tip right in a row, two of them right in a row, right out of the gate. Keep that bottle closed, because Jake will tell us the fancy scientific name for this, but it will absorb moisture from the air around it. And I live in Florida, and it'll soak that water in. I'm pretty sure it does the same thing up in Minnesota. Jake, what's that big fancy word for soaking in the water?
It's the property of alcohol, it's hygroscopic with a G. So hygroscopic, which means it absorbs moisture. And so if you don't mind, Chuck, I actually brought a prop here that will kind of help demonstrate why that property of alcohol. So the natural balancing point for alcohol with water and the actual isopropyl alcohol is about 70%. So if you leave a container open, yes, it's going to evaporate, but you may buy 90% pure, you may buy 99% pure, but every time you leave open that bottle and you leave it open, it's going to evaporate and moisture is going to be introduced to it. So you're going to end up with 70% rubbing alcohol at the end of the day. So I brought in one of these tubs, and I know they sell wipes in these types of containers that you can pull them out of the top. Well, and I don't know if you'll pick this up on the mic, but if you hear that huffing sound, I'm squeezing this thing. That's not sealed. This is not a sealed container. If you're going to have alcohol, make sure you screw on a top, have a screw on top bottle to make sure you have a secured bottle, because you're going to end up with 70% alcohol pretty quickly. And my opinion, the best way to use alcohol is in a sealed container with a clean wipe that you can just tear open. Now, you know, this is a clean lint-free towel with 99% alcohol. That's, if you're going to do alcohol, at least do it right.
Couple points, right? So as a technician in the field, well, I'm going to use just 2 separate points here, right? So when I was a technician in the field, I used to have, and I used to have one of those bottles that had the cap on it, and you would push on the top of the cap and it put alcohol on it. Is there a problem with using that? Because with you showed for those who are listening, not watching this video, Jake showed a sealed, I think it's foil. I use those in class. I think it's made out of foil. It's sealed, and you got to rip it open. You got to pull it out. But they dry really fast. B, they're going to absorb some moisture. And if you're doing 144 connectors, you're constantly, ripping open packets and stuff. So is there really a disadvantage to using the bottle type over the one that you showed?
I think you're going to introduce some alcohol into it as you're refilling it. And I think there's probably a difference in the quality of, I think they call that a Menda bottle. Am I right, Brian? The Menda bottle.
That's correct. Yeah.
Depending on that pumping mechanism, I think they're probably pretty good. What are your thoughts, Brian, on that?
Yeah, most of them are good, but I mean, it's like anything else. The quality is all over the map, right? Some of them are really good. Some of them, the cheap ones you can buy out there from off the internet or whatever. It just kind of depends. One of the other things too, sometimes you'll see is it's probably more like the splicing trailers, is that they'll have those Menda bottles for the alcohol, and then they'll just keep pouring more in and in. And the problem with that is that if you do start getting the moisture that's diluting it, or any kind of, really the way a lot of those bottles work, they're sucking the air in to actuate the pump to dispense the fluid. So you are always bringing a little bit of something in. And it may not always necessarily be water that's the problem. I mean, you have, dust in the air, dust in the work environment, and that can get pulled into that bottle as well, into that reservoir. And then I'll just say this too, the difference between, let's say, a Polywater alcohol wipe versus some of the other ones that are out there. Polywater, because they're making these for optical grade, it's not only is he using good alcohol, and he's using it in an optical grade wipe that's, like he said, is lint free. They're also looking at their packaging as well, because I've seen some alcohol wipes that were out there where you'll get particulate into the wipe, and I think it's the degradation of the packaging. So that's one of the things. If you are going to use alcohol wipes, you want to make sure that it's optical grade. You don't want to just use any alcohol wipe, even some of the medical wipe stuff out there. They seem to be all over the map. So I would say, if that's the path you want to go, and they work well, make sure you keep it sealed. But then also, if you use that wipe, how you handle the wipe. So I'll tell you, Jake, if you want to kind of talk about it, because you don't want to lay it down on the bench or whatever.
Right. Before you answer that, Jake. So you convinced me. You converted me, because as you both were talking, yes, it's in a sealed package. It's going to be a lot more pristine. So, you might say it might cost you a little bit extra time on opening of those packets, but all it takes is one bad, dirty connector and one roll of the truck, and you've wiped out any savings you had. And I didn't realize about people pouring, because I've done that many times. We pour additional alcohol into it, and I never thought, because you're adding more contamination to the contamination that didn't evaporate.
Yep.
Right. Jack, what was your?
Another thing to think about is when you're taking that wipe and you're going to push on top of that Menda bottle, you've got your hand on top of this wipe, and then you're going to flush alcohol through that, you feel it touch your hand. Well, all that's doing is dissolving oils and depositing them on your wipe in that process. So it's handling the materials is a big part of it as well.
So there's another question for the both of you, and we'll start with you first, Brian. So if I decide, if I'm moving over to those individual packets and I open one up, is it only good for that one connector, or what's a good best practice with that?
I would say yes. Generally speaking, I mean, you can, depending on the size of the wipe, you could code through and you could probably wipe different things on it if you're very careful. But just generally speaking, I'd say one per. And the reason is if you start thinking about a wipe, whether it's dry wipe or wet wipe, any contamination that you've just taken off the end face, you want it trapped in that wipe. So if I keep trying to reuse wipes again and again, there's a risk of me possibly going back over that area and cross-contaminating. And one of the things that just in conversations with some individuals kind of go, why are you reusing the wipes? Why are you doing that? Well, we're trying to save money. And it's like, look, every time you roll a truck out, depending on where you're at, it's probably at least $300 to $500, or at least in North America. And you're going to worry about a wipe that's, under 10 cents or something, come on. So generally speaking, don't be chintzy on the wipes. But I would tell people don't reuse the wipes.
What's your thoughts, Jake, on how many times a packet should be used?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to the size of the wipe. I mean, if you're talking a 5 by 8 inch wipe, and if you're starting on one side of the wipe, I think you might be able to get a couple extra if you're moving down the wipe. But again, that comes down to how good are you, and you might get onto connector 3 and like, well, geez, is this the first time I've used this wipe, or is it the third time? Because you're going to be doing a lot of them. So I think Brian's probably right. It's the safest way to go. But yeah, you definitely don't want to be going over areas that you've already wiped before.
It's like that Dirty Harry. Did I fire 5 shots or 6 shots?
Exactly.
Do you feel lucky, punk?
Yeah. To an extent, do you feel lucky? If you do, okay,
right.
We'll see.
Well, here's the thing, right? So, because I use those full packs. Matter of fact, it's your product, Jake, in our classes when I teach them, and it's in class. Terminating in a classroom environment is different than terminating in the real world. There's things you do in a classroom environment that you don't do in a real world. For example, we're working with little pieces of fiber. So you got to tie a knot on one end, because if you don't, the boot's going to fall off. In a real world, you don't tie a knot in a fiber because, well, the other end of the fiber is in a different part of the building, right? So you don't have to do that. So in a classroom environment, I'm using the same wipe. What I do is I fold it back up and put it back in the packet, because if you open up that packet, if you're going to try to use that packet, because you got the big one, like Jake said, and you're going to try to get 2 or 3 out of it. Well, if you're just setting it right there on the desk, again, that hygrophobic properties of the
hygroscopic.
You'll teach me yet. It's going to start absorbing that moisture as soon as it's out of the packet, right?
Yeah, and that's probably the bigger point.
Yeah,
sure.
And to add to your point, Brian, a lot of people always think about how much it costs to roll a truck. You quoted $300 to $500. That's actually right in the ballpark. But what a lot of people, and I've said this before, a lot of people, what they don't think about is, okay, so that guy that you're that's costing $300 to go send over to do that repair job, that guy's supposed to be on another job making revenue for the company. They're losing that revenue, right? So it's actually double that. And how do you calculate the loss in customer confidence? Because you overlooked something as simple as cleaning a connector. Right. That's
Chuck, you're right. It's an intangible cost. How do you calculate that? What's the cost of your company's reputation? What's the aggravation? And you'll see things quoted out there, like the Uptime Institute or something like that, where they're looking at, what is the cost when a network is down with different industries. And it could be very expensive. So for example, if you're having to roll a truck back to a subscriber who was excited about getting his new internet broadband service to his home, and he's having to come out there 2 or 3 times to address a dirty connector, you think that guy's going to stick with you once your contract's up? He's going to go over to the other company. Or if you're dealing with something in a data center environment, if you're working, for example, in the financial industry, or you're working in the healthcare industry, where large amounts of information have to be transmitted very quickly because the transactional costs can be very expensive, you don't want to do something silly by having dirty connectors or reusing wipes to try to save a few pennies. The best thing to do is, and this kind of sort of goes into the importance of training and making sure your team understands how to select products, what products to use when, right? There's no silver bullet with a lot of this stuff. There's different products that are available out there that are designed for specific situations, and making sure your team understands is the key. So training is a huge component of this.
Well, that actually kind of ties right into my next question. Consistency, right? Consistency is defined as doing the same task or something repetitively enough, over and over again, right? What can we do to help people be more consistent in keeping their fiber clean? Because you mentioned what you kind of actually described was mission critical application, right? If that bank's fiber network goes down and they can't communicate to their ATM, how much money do they lose, right? And so how can we be more? How can we teach consistency to how can the project manager teach consistency? How can the fiber tech out in the field become more consistent?
I think this is a question for Brian. I mean, he's got a lot of training experience in this. I think it's training. I think you need to educate people, and that's part of what you're doing, Chuck, is teaching people the correct practices. I mean, you also got to start with you have to start with the right materials for sure, but then you absolutely have to teach people the right methods. And I think there's resources for that. But if you're planning on doing something correctly, you have to invest in your people and you have to have them up to speed. I think that's where it starts.
Brian, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I agree. It's not only, well, first, one of the things I think that you could do to try to help your organization be successful is spending a little bit of time with your team, making sure they understand how to use the products that are available to them. So, for example, there's a lot of tendency people want to use the mechanical cleaners that click, and they just want to sit there and bang on the interface with the clickers. Those things are designed to remove light to medium levels of contamination. But if you have something that's heavily soiled, you need to go into a wet to dry situation. And that goes back into using like the pre-saturated alcohol wipes that were sealed, like Jake was showing a minute ago, or even using some of the solvent in the wipes like Jake was, some of the products that Jake's companies make. The other thing is also sometimes too, I think just periodically explaining to your team why this is important. A lot of times guys will kind of get in a hurry. They know time is money. There's a lot of pressure to hurry up and get the project done. But if you're not doing it right the first time, you have to go back and fix it. It's going to cause you problems. But spending some time making sure your team understands when you encounter this particular connector and here's the type of contamination, or here's the type of scenario that we're going into, whether it's a data center or a pedestal at the neighborhood, making sure your team sort of understands, hey, here are the available options to you. When you run into this, these will be the recommended products to use. It's not one size fits all. You want your technicians trained so that they can think and make intelligent choices, wise choices, and also knowing how to use these products. And I'll tell you another one, especially, and Jake could probably talk more about it with the chemicals, making sure you understand all the safety procedures, making sure that you understand how to properly handle it, store it, safety data sheets.
Yeah, we're gonna cover safety here in just a second. So yeah, I believe firm believer in training, and that's not because I'm a trainer. I mean, even before I was a trainer, I was always training my crews, because the better they perform, the better I perform. The better I perform, the more money everybody can make, right? So that's one avenue. I think two other thoughts here from a project management perspective or ownership, because I've got people in different levels from our audiences. Maybe come up with a best practice, and say, it's a best practice, just like a best practice for testing. You got to check the testers, make sure all the pieces are there. You got to make sure you got to log them in, log them out. Same thing for fiber and fiber termination. And then the last thing I have is, I'm a firm believer in checklists, right? And my son's an airline pilot. He flies for, I can't think of the name of the company, but they fly for Amazon. They fly all the packages all around the world. So he flies a 757. Every time he takes off, he goes through, even though he's got 4,000 hours of flying, he goes through a checklist. He may know it by heart, but he still goes through that checklist, because it's when you become, I don't want to say lax, but when you become comfortable you quit paying attention to the details. And it's that one, like you said, that one microscopic piece of dirt on that end face that, while it might work as soon as you plugged it in, but maybe the IT guy was doing some moves as changes right above or next to you. He bumped it just a tiny bit, and it's just enough to shift that contamination over, and now it's blocking that signal. And here we are, 15 seconds to a launch at the space over Cape Canaveral. I taught a class there a few weeks back. We were sitting there teaching, and the guy says, "Do you want to take a break at 9:17?" I was like, "That's an unusual time for a break." He goes, "That's when they're doing the launch." I'm like, "Launch!" So we stopped, went outside. We watched one of the SpaceX things go up in the air. Truly impressive. Truly impressive. Truly impressive. Now, you did touch on the safety. Maybe we'll let Jake start off with this, because he's the chemical guy, right? So we know alcohol is flammable. So obviously you don't want to. Pro tip here: don't smoke while you're terminating fire with alcohol.
Right.
Obviously,
not to mention the smoke particles that would probably be in the air and contaminating things.
Right. And here's something a lot of people don't think about. My wife is a reactive asthmatic, right? So certain odors will send her into an asthmatic attack. And if you're working in an environment where it's a data center, there's people working, you don't know what kind of aspiration or breathing issues they may have or not, right? So you got to pay attention to the environment. So what kind of safety protocols should we pay attention to, Jake, since we're dealing with these kind of chemicals?
Well, everything starts with the SDS, which is the safety data sheet, and that's your guideline. That's your checklist. That's going to tell you all the hazards, how to handle the materials, and how to solve an issue if you do come in contact with something that you're not supposed to. But I think it's good to discuss the safety part of it, because we talked about 3 different types of cleaners. We talked about alcohol, then your fast evaporating, non-flammable, and then a water-based cleaner. And they all have their benefits and what they're strong at. I mean, alcohol, people go to alcohol because it's something they know and something that they're comfortable with. And let's face it, cost. It's readily available, and they know the cost is reasonable. But it also comes with, believe it or not, it's more hazardous than the other 2 cleaners. One's water-based, the other one's non-flammable and non-toxic. So a lot of people don't realize, just because rubbing alcohol is isopropyl alcohol, the same thing that you're using, there is what's called a threshold limit value. That the fumes go into the air, and there is a limit of at which you have to have ventilation, and it can be irritable. It can be an irritant. So there are definite drawbacks. You have to have ventilation, and you may get a headache, and it's not particularly great for you. And that's why a lot of people will go to the fast evaporating, non-flammable in a confined space. And then obviously the water-based products, I mean, they're harmless, completely harmless. You're not getting any vapor or anything like that. So it's not just drying out your skin or spills. It's the vapor as well from the flame, or excuse me, from the chemical.
Chuck, can I sort of tag on that too? One of the things I see a lot of times, and even now, we have conversations about people about wanting to use the dusters, the basically the air dusters, and not all those are the same, and they're actually considered a chemistry product. And so, for example, if you're operating in certain places like Orange County, California, the restrictions there on dusters are more stringent than they are like with the federal regulations. So when you think about chemicals, it's not always necessarily just a solvent, but also even things like dusters and some of these pre-saturated wipes and stuff like that too, because I mean they are saturated with some kind of a chemistry in it. But Jake actually touched on something kind of interesting here, with the water. So they've had some water-based cleaners out for a while, and I've heard people say, hey, water's bad or water's a contaminant. I disagree. I've actually used some of the aqua-based products, including the Polywater that Jake has. It works actually really well. There's a lot that goes into it, but I would say, if you're thinking about chemicals to use on the work site, you want to think about the safety aspect of it, but also think about like the packaging of it as well. And so companies like Polywater are not just using any water in it, and they have a very particular process that ensures the quality and the purity of that product. But I would just tell people, hey, there's a lot of new things that are kind of coming onto the market. So what if you tried something several years ago and you think, I would say don't rule some of the stuff out, or also don't be careful about listening to some of the marketing spin that you hear out there about like water bad, or because there's a lot of new materials that are starting to kind of come online that are available for network install.
Tune in next week for more tips on fiber optic cleaning. Until then, knowledge is power.
That's it for this episode of today's podcast. We hope you were able to learn something. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future content. Also, leave a rating so we can help even more people learn about telecommunications. Until next time, be safe.